How old are your kids now, Jonathan?
My son turned 18.
Okay.
Actually, while we were at Mount Athos, which was really cool.
Oh, wow.
And then
They were with you?
No, my son was with me at Mount Athos. My daughter obviously can't go to Mount Athos.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Basic sexism there. You can't. Women aren't allowed on Mount Athos for it's been 1,000 years.
Wow.
So,
wow.
One of the oldest constitutions in the world. Probably the only oldest one, like in the West, is the Vatican. And so there you go. How could you do that? 1,000 years, no women, just men for 1,000 years.
Wow.
Anyway, so my daughter's 15, and then my youngest daughter's 12. So
okay, all right.
What's on that mountain or island?
Monks.
Just
A
dudes.
lot of monks.
All right.
It's a peninsula in Greece that has about 20 official monasteries, but about 60 monasteries, like with all these little monasteries. So there's about 2,000 monks there now. It's the center of Orthodox monasticism, really.
Okay.
And it's like a magical mountain with like all these trails and fortified monasteries, dotted across. So it's an astounding place.
What do they spend their energy or their attention on? Is it strictly
prayer? The whole monk thing,
Yeah.
That's why there's no women there. That would be a major distraction.
Yeah, that's right. So they mostly pray. So when we were there, we spent at least 6 hours a day in church. And so they start at 3 a.m, and then there's a night service, and then morning and everything. So but they also have gardens, and they're all kind of self-sustaining. And they also have some of the oldest books in the world. They have libraries, treasuries. It's a center for research too, because they have all these old documents.
Yeah. Oh, and the music life? Do they?
Yeah, they definitely have all these. There's a few traditions of chanting that are there. There's one tradition that's actually quite unique to one of the monasteries, and so it's all this Byzantine chanting. Yeah. So,
how long were you there?
Just for a week, like 7 days. Yeah.
Wow. That must have been a tremendous experience.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was really amazing and helpful to kind of come back and refocus, because I was kind of losing it there at the end. Just before leaving, I wasn't doing super well because I mean, Benjamin, you don't know, but I got all these problems. My website was like falling apart, and we did this crowdfunding last year, and some of the books had not shipped yet in Europe because we got refused, tax problems and all these issues. Like, it was just these not ongoing problems that just wouldn't go away. But now it's weird because I kind of let go of it while I was there, and then when I got back, it all got solved. So now I have a new website, which is awesome, and the books are in people's hands. So
Wow,
glory to God.
So you guys are having something coming up here, right? Or did it already happen?
Yeah, you gonna come?
I wish. I have so many other commitments this spring. Everybody's doing something this spring. I'm like, can't you guys do it in July?
Because COVID's over, and it's like everybody's just wanting to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
So
I'll be in Ireland for the GenSpect conference, and
when is this?
That's at the end of April.
Okay.
What is that?
It is so there are these organizations, professional organizations, WPATH and EPATH, which are the Professional Association of Transgender Health, and they're heavily ideological, as you might imagine. And GenSpect is trying to do a broader lens on the trans issue and trans healthcare and detrans issue, and they're having it at the same time as the EPATH. So you can see that there's the ideologically captured and then a more discursive, conversational based conference at the same time. There.
Are you going to follow the tradition of YouTubers transitioning, Benjamin? Is that going to be a big reveal?
Should I?
Oh my goodness.
Why not?
My plain advice to you is no.
No. Yeah, I like.
It's always if you're running out of attention, it's always a good thing to do.
It's a good boost. It's a good boost. I love women too much to become one. So it's not quite want to be one. It's just like There's just some threshold of my adoration that I can't leave.
Yeah, the problem is that you could love women so much that you also want to see one in the mirror. That's the weird thing about some of it. It's like it's a auto eroticism too.
Yeah.
Some of it.
It's heavily psychological. There's so many different facets to it. The conversation just keeps on going, and trying to help these young men and young women to navigate this. It's just such a fad. They just get wrapped up in these crazy ideas, and then they start popping hormones.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Listening to Peterson talk about it just sounds like gender dysphoria is the new bulimia. It's just such a frightening thing.
Yeah, well, like my daughter is 12, and all her friends except for maybe 2 or 3 have one of the letters is one of the letters. It's like it's an 80-90%.
Yeah.
It's like it's not 10%, it's not 10%, it's not 20%, it's 80 to 90%.
Yeah.
So that's so ridiculous that I don't see how anyone even like that's reasonable in the movement could think that that's a normal outcome.
Yeah. What does your daughter think? What's her take on it?
I mean, she doesn't know. It's just normal for her. And that's just how it is.
Yeah.
But it's ridiculous because it's like, you're 11 and you're bisexual. No, you're not bisexual. You're 11. Because you never kissed anybody. You're nothing. You like, just take it easy. It's like that. Anyways.
Here's Wokal. If Wokal shows up,
yeah,
Wokal,
he's kind of there.
I am here.
Oh, you are.
Right.
I am here.
Okay.
You need a camera.
Yeah. I'm here. I'll get the camera in just a second. Give me just a second.
He likes to fiddle. So what's coming up with you guys? Your conference?
So there's a conference in Chino, California, with John Vervaeke and Paul and John Van Donk, which you probably don't know, but someone who's worked with Paul quite a bit. And so it's finding a quest for a spiritual home. Quest for a spiritual home. So
John really wanted the quest word. So
yeah.
Good word.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good word. It's always great. These are always awesome. Like the one we did in Thunder Bay was really wonderful. Just because the quality of people that come to these things is so high that
it really is.
It makes it great. Yeah.
I like that word, quest.
Good word.
So we will be talking, and we will have the conference again will be kicked off with Paintball for Jesus. Grim Grizz wanted to be on a cross and a jockstrap and have all of us shooting at him with paintballs.
Oh.
But apparently the paintball venue didn't really find that in terms of its liabilities.
Yeah.
So Grim Grizz and a jockstrap on a cross will likely not be appearing.
Yeah, that's good. I probably wouldn't show up for that. Just to warn you, Paul. Even the name Paintball for Jesus causes deep hesitation in me. But I'll play along. But if there's some act of desacralization involved, I'll just skip it.
Why not call it apostolic paintball? Isn't that a little bit safer?
Apostolic paintball.
Well, Grim Grizz kind of think. I mean, churches forever, this, Benjamin, have had these softball leagues and all these sports leagues, and he thinks that for Grizz and his own story, he just sees but he's also like he's a bit of a he plays the role a bit of a kind of a holy clown. Like that's the role he's kind of taken for himself, a kind of holy fool kind of character. Yeah.
Is this mostly men showing up to your activities?
No, the doc says right? a lot of women got in first in terms of registration. So,
but it was like a third women, I would think right. I think that's what Catherine said.
Yeah,
so.
I think it'll probably be close to half in this one.
Yeah, I think so.
So are you guys going to do like a spinoff, like dating kind of matchmaking kind of thing?
I have one like symbolic world marriage. Like we have one couple that met through symbolic world stuff, and they're married now.
Yeah, we've got 3 and some babies.
That's cool, and babies. Wow, so there you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's happening. but there's still a lot of men in the space, as Jonathan said. But I think that's just a transitional phase. I think the women will come.
And what are the men seeking on these quests for home? Women, right? I mean, that's right in the name.
Oh, I wish.
They're seeking life.
Yeah, I think just men, the young guys are so alienated, and just kind of, it's in some ways it's the opposite of myself and my parents, let's say, in the sense that my parents, they grew up in the kind of strict traditional world, and they fought the hippies, they fought to have access to sex and drugs and rock and roll, and now we kind of grew up half in that world. But the young people, it's like they're just drowning in porn and video games. So they don't have to fight for any of it. It's just like, what am I doing?
It's late antiquity all over again.
Yeah, so they're looking for something solid to stand on.
Okay. And
Robin Fox wrote a really interesting book on sort of the first half of Augustine's life, and in late antiquity, this fad of virginity really took hold, and wealthy families were in absolute terror of their daughters joining convents and their sons joining monasteries, because suddenly all of these marriages arranged since their childhood were being torn asunder because people just wanted out of the sexual marketplace, as it were. And that's coming around again, it appears.
Was this early Christian monasteries and convents or something else?
Yeah.
Late antiquity, so 3rd, 4th, 5th century.
Okay.
I mean, basically when after the conversion of Constantine and the end of the persecution, a lot of, obviously, when persecution ended, then people flooded back into the churches. A lot of people that had been marginally Christian or had, denounced their Christianity or just kind of stayed in the edges. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, this flood. So then the hardcore people needed a new way to show that they were hardcore, and then the monasteries became that for them.
Okay.
They're the elites.
Yeah.
There's a point to be made. There's a point to be made about
just running in from wherever he is.
He's making macaroni, I bet.
I just picture him throwing on clothes and, feeding children and wait.
Sorry,
there
go
is
for
a
it.
point to be made about the fact that the dramatic categories of the libertine liberal left get their kind of paradigm from this idea that Elvis shaking his hips was like this transgressive thing. And because that transgressive paradigm of liberty is for them what they seek, they're always finding a new boundary to try and recreate that moment.
Yeah.
And so they're always chasing that.
The Elvis movie that came out recently, which was pretty well made, that you could just see that's exactly what they were playing into. It was like, here is this like deep transgression, but it's not just a transgression, right? It's also that the idea that transgression is a portal to the reality, and any type of formality or rules are a form of hypocrisy and superficial existence. So it's such a deep mythology that it takes a lot to shake people out of it. It takes in some ways someone who's drowning in, like I said, drowning in porns and video game to be able to think like, wait, what am I transgressing? Like, there's nothing left. So it's yeah.
Huh. How does one, when I think about the political tides and, I'm investigating like dissident right or reactionary right thought, and, and they're basically trying to critique the liberal order or it's beyond critiquing wokeness, because they're like, no, wokeness is just a outgrowth of liberalism. But I'm wondering, like, when you start to create new structures, like, what do you do with the rebellious instinct? What do you do with ambition? How do you capture that stuff? So I'm wondering, with what you guys are doing with your meetups and the in live thing, like, where are you seeing the attraction to this, other than just fleeing porn and video games? Like, is there like a positive
No, I think it is
ambition,
positive in the sense that it's affirming important things. Like it's recalibrating your attention towards something better, and then kind of rebuilding yourself out of that attention. At least that's what I see with the guys that go to church. So in my church, we had a massive wave during COVID, after COVID, of young guys that came to church. And it's not just that they're fleeing their thing. They started a work co-op. They do morning prayers together, and then they work together, and they're trying to like rebuild each other's lives. They help each other financially. They're trying to kind of rebuild something that is something like a community. So it's not just fleeing degeneracy. Like there's really a sense of building. At least that's what I see.
I think that part of the reason is I have the book here. Searle.
You love your Searle.
You have no idea. This book.
I'm not sure if you can hardly Elvis or Andrew Tate here, but anyway, go on.
Both. The Campus War. He talks about the dramatic categories. And one of the things that he says is that there is, for the liberal professor, there's a set of dramatic categories which are invoked and are at work. And what he talks about is how the moment the student says, I want my liberty, I want my blah, 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 whatever it is, and the administration says no, they're immediately trapped in these sort of dramatic categories of what was going on when the students really did have the moral high ground in cases against racism, in cases against Jim Crow. But as soon as that drama starts, those categories are now re-inhabited, they're re-embodied by everyone involved. And so those dramatic categories in a very real way kind of determine how all of that's going to end up working out. And so what always happens is the administration, the moment the battle starts, the moment the students say, hey, we want X, Y, and Z, the students are immediately cast in the role of the freedom-loving, rebellious, idealist, and the administration is the role of the crass, self-interested, careerist bureaucrat. And he says this is part of what determines the problem, because as soon as that happens, your liberal professor who's acting on principle is going to side with whom? If he reads that event through the dramatic categories that are already in play. A very, very similar thing is happening now. The only dramatic categories that we have for identity formation is the dramatic category of rebelling.
Yeah.
That's how you get away from your parents. Yeah. There is no dramatic category for. So the dramatic category that I had was not I'm rebelling against my parents to separate. It's I'm a plant in a greenhouse. I've outgrown my greenhouse. I need to be planted out in the world. Yeah. But that's not a dramatic category which most people have access to. And so the dramatic category they default to is rebelling against their parents or rebelling against authority.
And we've had that in the White House from both Trump and Biden, but they're doing it both sides are now doing the exact same game.
Both sides are trying. Both sides.
Do a little bit more on that. What do you see, Paul?
Well, the liberal professor watches the dynamics and wants to be on the winning side. And so you have Trump, who is this strange president that tweets as if he's not president or not in charge of, then you construct this there's a deep state, or there's the machine, or there's something over there that's really controlling. It's always talking against the man, even when you are the man.
Okay.
Yeah. Trump was the underdog outsider that came to take, from the jocks that are already in power. Like he's this outsider, he's the rumbler, he's coming in, and it is the narrative. It's the US narrative. It's like Mighty Ducks or whatever. It's like it's every story. It's 80% of this American movies have that Karate Kid story in it.
Yeah, it's always the underdog against the illegitimate authority. Right. And that's why Searle talks about the dramatic categories. He says as soon as the students pick a topic, as soon as that happens, the dramatic categories are set and the die is cast in terms of how it's going to be going. And he says, look, there's an added wrinkle in terms of the campus because the administration is somewhat set out from the faculty. He says if you put the faculty in charge of these universities entirely, where every vote was a vote of the faculty, all of a sudden the faculty could not ignore the long-term political ramifications of the stances that they take.
Yeah.
And I mean, Searle was a part of the free speech movement at Berkeley. He was the first professor to join. So what he's talking about is how these things have been, and we'll get to this later, about what's happened in this is that once you say that the students are right and there's just vulgar, crass bureaucrats running the administration, that view of the administration of the university helps with the narrative that the university is merely a tool to achieve certain political ends. And all of a sudden, the goal then becomes to say, well, if it's a tool for achieving political ends, those ends should be mine, not yours. Therefore, I, the student, demand curricular control. The administration says no. And now we're acting out that drama again, where I, as the student, am standing up for justice, and you, as the authority, are holding me back and holding me down, even though what's happening? Like, if the professors are just holding you down, why are you attending the university? Who's teaching whom? If the students already know anything, why aren't they the professors? So there's this dilemma that's going on that needs to be addressed in terms of the dramatic categories.
But it's so profound. It's so deep. I mean, it is the revolutionary, trope itself. It's a very, very profound story. It's the Enlightenment trope itself. So I'm not quite sure how to get out of it easily, let's say. That is the cost of getting out of it is quite radical. In some ways, it means, it has to be. I think that's why we push for self-transformation first. Like, you have to be able to realize that own story in your life first. You have to be able to change the root of your attention, the root of what you think is the highest first, or else you end up repeating it. You'll end up repeating it no matter what, because, like Paul mentioned, the same story that is behind the hippies is behind the libertarian Southerner, is behind it's all the same. It's all the same story. It's just you cast the others as the illegitimate authority or whatever, and then you place yourself in the role of the rebel. And then it just whoever is able to convince the most people that they're the. But it's interesting now because you do see at some point, like the hippie story played so hard that it's difficult when the people in power, they are basically the ones that had that story. And now how do they hold power, kind of make themselves rebels and authoritarian at the same time? Yeah. But you can see versions of it. Like they're different people who try to play that. And to cast the others, I mean, Clinton tried to cast the people as deplorables, right? Make them almost kind of nothing in order so they don't look like rebels that are trying to take back power.
Huh.
But this story is so inherent in Christianity because it's built into the entire Jesus narrative. I mean, Jackson Browne, the rebel, he sings about Jesus as the rebel king. And obviously you've got this, Jesus is the true king, comes into Jerusalem. I mean, for the Orthodox, you just had Palm Sunday. You're heading towards Pascha. This is the entire narrative where the hidden king is crucified. And, the sun refuses to shine, the earthquake, the graves are open. And, there's the resolution of the story obviously doesn't come until the New Jerusalem and the new heavens.
The
and the new
difference
earth
is that Christ never rebels against the authority, not once.
So this book here, The Rebel Cell by Andrew Potter and Joseph Heath, talks about this. And what their theory basically is that the counterculture was a critique of mass society. And that narrative that the society is holding me down, and they trace it right back to Marcuse, to the kind of neo-Marxist Frankfurt School. Influential ideas from Freud and Marx were all picked up by counterculture rebels. That movement all the way through, that's all the way up to, like, do you guys remember Naomi Klein and No Logo? You guys remember that?
I remember them.
All of that, the riots in 1999, the Battle for Seattle, the World Trade Organization protests, all of that is coming from that counterculture narrative that, the man sends the fuzz round to bust your stash. That's the Beatles saying, look, man, you got to free your mind, right? That's the goal, right? That countercultural mindset. But that countercultural mindset has almost vacated our culture entirely in terms of, and has been replaced by wokeness. But really, one is an extension of the other because it's really just the postmodernification of it. And so what ends up happening is, for this narrative here, for the rebel cell, for the countercultural rebels, the idea was that whether it was punks in the 80s or whether it was skaters or whether it was the drug people with Timothy Leary, whichever group it was, pick whichever one you want. All of those people were kind of doing something the same thing, which is something interesting, which is to say, look, everyone has been brainwashed by the system, man, and they're all walking around like sheep, man. And we need to wake them up. And what Guy Debord, and we talked about this, Ben, a couple of years ago, Guy Debord from the Situationist International said, look, the smallest of symbols and the smallest of acts is enough to shake somebody and wake them up and let them know, oh, it doesn't need to be this way. You have to pluck them out of that mindset because the whole social milieu is making them accept all of this. And there's a postmodern-ish kind of turn in there. And so all of the culture jamming that was being done, so you think of Adbusters, that's Kale Lawson's.
Yeah, I was looking for that name, Adbusters.
Yeah,
you guys remember that magazine? It was,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
remember
all so
Adbusters.
cynical.
Yeah.
Like it would be funny every once in a while, but it just perverts into this. There's no
That's right.
There's no message in this thing other than just subversion.
That's right, because they're endlessly subverting the system because okay, so that view is that we're always rebelling against mass society, right? Society is always the problem. And eventually Potter and Heath say, look, man, we've been rebelling against society for 60 years, and now we're all rebelling against society. We are the society that we are rebelling against.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And where has this rebellion got us? But there was a stroke of genius by the counterculturists that allowed them to continue. And that was that, well, it's not real subversion because they've co-opted our subversion. We've been co-opted by the system. The bands that we use to rebel have sold out to the man.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you rebel your way up. And then when you get to a measure of success, as soon as you get there, now you've sold out. That's why the Grateful Dead, like Dead and Company, John Mayer's band. I love John Mayer. I have one of his guitars. It's sitting right there. But Dead and Company, sponsored by Visa. Right. This is, they have American Express is their advertiser.
Now you can buy your weed with a Visa.
That's right. And they would say, look, they've co-opted our subversion, man.
Okay, so
Right, because-
Wokal, what do you think? Because something happened in 2016, which really did happen. That is that the 4chan Anon culture,
Froggies,
appeared as the ultimate subversive culture.
Right.
I mean, it was subversive. It was crass. It was doing all the things that Robert Crumb was doing in the 60s, but times 10 in terms of breaking all the taboos in terms of doing all that. And so they appear, and then they become kind of like the Trump supporters. They turned on him at some point, but at the beginning they were like the ones trying to kind of meme him into office. Yeah, and then we end up with the situation with COVID, which is this with the weird thing where now the people that are against the system, they're not rebels like the hippies. They're just local. What do they call it? Terrorists, internal terrorists or whatever term
insurgents,
they use now. Insurgents or like home terrorism,
domestic extremists.
Domestic terrorism, that's the term they use. And so it's a fascinating turn of events that we've seen just happen in the past, 6 years.
And coeval with that is what you guys are doing too. There's also a resurgence or reinterest in faith and Christianity, facilitated by Jordan Peterson's translation of Jung and then updating of Christianity to a postmodern kind of discursive. He opened up that box again, and now there's a lot more men who are rebelling in a sense against that rebellion. Women too, rebelling against the sense of rebellion and starting to play around with ideas of being trad or ideas of being pagan or ideas of being Christian again, in concert with the Pepes and the gamer word using shitlords, right, and edgelords, right? So there is this, and that's where the energy is for me, and it is a subversive energy. I'm not going to say that the rebellion is
subversive submission, though. I mean, Jonathan's right about Jesus. Jesus isn't a rebel like Che Guevara or anybody else on a T-shirt. You know, Jesus' disciples say things like, "Slaves, submit to your masters as to the Lord." And we hear that and say, how is that rebellion? That's Uncle Tomism.
So there's a sense in which a couple of things have happened, and one of them is that there is this. The narrative is kind of focal negative, but it's kind of not, in exactly the following way. The hippies and the postmodern social justice woke people are rebelling in the name of autonomy, something like Carl Truman's expressive individualism. The political right is rebelling against expressive individualism. Both of them are trying to claim that the other side is in charge. What's actually happened is that in terms of the left, the expressive individualists own the culture, and until recently, I would say until 2016, the conservatives were generally more likely to be in charge of the institutions. That has changed. And it is now the case that through DEI and the corporate, that the woke are now in charge of almost everything in the culture. But the woke define themselves as being out of power. So in the sense, so it's in the same way that Caitlyn Jenner is a woman, the woke are out of power. They identify as being out of power. Okay?
Yeah.
That's self-identification on their part.
I'm trying to figure this out because I see the problem that's there, and I'm trying to see how they can maintain the story.
They always see themselves as being out of power. That's how they think of themselves. Yeah. And so even when they're operating, they would say, yes, I'm operating, but I was raised in a culture of socialization, which requires a deeper deconstruction and following Freire. If I ever stop deconstructing, I become the status quo. So it's a bias against freezing, a bias against stopping. Always there's always a taboo that is the line. And it's that line. That's why leftism, people try to think of leftism. They say, well, it's an unstoppable force. Leftism is a horizon. It's always going after a horizon. And it never stops because it can never get to the horizon. And so for them, they are always, and in every case, for the oppressed, and will find any instance, because of their idea that everything is systemic and the external locus of control, any instance of oppression is proof positive that the system itself is corrupt. And if I'm in a system that is itself it's corrupt, I can rebel against that even though I'm the president. I'm never the person in charge because the locus of control is always external to me. The most I could ever be is even, and I could never get there. So that's the thing. And then the conservatives are rebelling against that. So when the conservatives started picking up that said, hey, we're the new counterculture, I was like, why are we adopting that narrative?
Is there any other narrative?
Because when we adopt that narrative, as soon as we come into power, we lose the narrative on which we wrote in on. It undercuts us out from under us. So what we need to do is we need to have a narrative that doesn't rely on us being out of power. It's very tempting. In a certain sense, we're the Travis Kelce of politics right now, because Travis Kelce said at the Super Bowl, not a one of you thought we were going to win. Not a one of you. Dude, you were the second favorite team entering into the season. Half the forecasters picked you to win the Super Bowl. Not a one of you picked us. No, almost everyone picked you. You were the favorite. You were the betting odds, Travis. But it's like we adopt this as like a sort of like us against the world mentality. And I think conservatives don't want to us against the world. I don't think that's good. I think we have to adopt a vision of what's good. See, we have to stop aiming for just justice, because justice says, okay, now everyone has the same. Okay, now what? What are we going to do? We have to adopt something which is better. We have to have something to aim at. We have to have a target. Right now, we don't have a target. We have...
Benjamin, this goes to what you're saying, that and what you were talking about with Arl in terms of there needs to be a center, and that's what Pageau says all the time. What we've got are right now parasites in conflict, and those parasites, want their host to arise, but then they want to supplant the host, and you have this perpetual revolution. But you need something foundational. The difficulty that we have is the old foundations, Constantinople, Rome. Here in the New World, Protestantism sort of had a community of rebels as its foundation, and we're sort of reaching the realization of
because
that.
it's there in the Puritan, it's already there because we talk about Frankfurt School or whatever, but it's there in Anabaptism and in Puritanism. Not Anabaptists, at least they didn't, most of them, especially after the first crazy wave, but after the first crazy wave, most of them don't want to take down society, right? They just want to be left alone and be against the world. But in the Puritan spirit, there is a little bit of that, right? It's like, we're going to make our own, we're going to take over the system. So that's true. It seems to be part of the American story very deeply in a very deep way that I don't know how to get out of, except that I think that with the classical, there is a classical, let's say, part of American founding, like a sense of being connected to classical wisdom and to classical knowledge. And I think that the idea of truth, goodness, beauty is something that the conservatives, whatever that means, they can look to and say, this is our aim. Like the transcendentals are our aim, and we can argue for them very convincingly, especially now as we kind of watch everything fall apart. It's not that hard to say, right, that there is a need for transcendent goodness and transcendent beauty.
Yeah.
At least I don't. It seems like there's an opportunity to do that now.
Well, that was so. I'm just going to keep quoting Searle. He talks about how part of what, maybe I'll just read it at some point, but he talks about how the motivation for the anti-logo. I'm just going to have to read this because it's too good.
You have to read it to us. As
you guys can go do your thing.
As you smoke your hookah with your Bruce Springsteen bandana.
Wait, let me turn my camera off and clean my room while we're.
Okay, hold on.
I'll just listen here in the background and talk when things happen.
But Paul, I wanted to bring up what you've been talking about heroism.
I've got it.
Okay, go for it. Wokal, read it.
If the relation of the Western rationalistic tradition to the traditional ideas of the universities is more or less obvious, the relation between attacks on the Western rationalistic tradition and proposals for education reform is much less obvious. It is simply a fact that, in recent history, rejection of the Western rationalistic tradition has gone hand in hand with the proposals for politically motivated changes in the curriculum. So, what is the connection? I think the relationships are very complex, and I do not know of any simple answer to the question. But underlying all the complexity there is, I believe, a simple structure. Those who want to use the universities, especially the humanities, for leftist political transformation correctly perceive that the Western rationalistic tradition is an obstacle in their path. In spite of their variety, most of the challengers to the traditional conception of education correctly perceive that if they are forced to conduct academic life according to the set of rules determined by constraints of truth, objectivity, clarity, rationality, logic, and the brute existence of the real world, their task is made all the more difficult, perhaps impossible. If you think the purpose of teaching the history of the past is to achieve social and political transformation of the present, then the traditional canons of historical scholarship, the canons of objectivity, evidence, close attention to the facts, and above all truth, can sometimes seem an unnecessary and oppressive regime that stands in the way of achieving more important social objectives. In my experience, the present multiculturalist reformers of higher ed did not come to receive a revised conception of education through a refutation of the Western rationalistic tradition. Rather, they sought a refutation of the Western rationalistic tradition that would justify a revised conception of education they already found appealing. That was written in Daedalus.
So was he arguing for, or was he, his value is rationality?
So I think that's where I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong because I think that one of the things the postmoderns get right is that rationalism is not sufficient for action. Like rationalism is not there is a reason, there's a drive for action which precedes rationalism, and that's why my call to the transcendentals is actually not a call to rationalism in the simple sense. It's a call to transcendent value, and that transcendent value then informs the rational world. The difficulty we have is that a lot of the quote unquote conservatives, they're still liberals in the sense that they really do believe in this rationalistic world. And so they just want to, can we just turn the clock back, 15 minutes before this all exploded? But I think we can't. We need to recapture something that is beyond reason in order for reason to find its anchor.
So I'm going to requote Searle again from this book, which is Language, Mind, and Society. And we're going to touch on exactly that point.
All right, go
because
for it.
His diagnosis of what happens to the universities is exactly correct. All of the stuff about being politically motivated is bang on. Their relativism, bang on. Ontological relativism, bang on. Politically motivated subjectivism, bang on.
Yeah.
But he puts his finger on the problem and solves it in the wrong direction.
Okay, go for it.
Ultimate reality, to speak grandly, is the reality described by chemistry and physics. Here we go.
Yeah.
It is the reality of the world consisting of entities we find it convenient, if not entirely accurate, to call particles that exist in fields of forces. That view itself is not realism, but is the claim that how, within the realist background, the world turned out. Realism is a background presupposition that says there is a way that things are. True. Physics is a discipline that contains theories. Also true. The theories say this is how things are. Anti-realists, in challenging the background supposition, challenge not so much the theory, but the status of the theory. Because there's no way that things are independently of us, physics can't be telling us how they are. Physics is just one social construct. So here we're going to go. He's going to get right into it. But somebody will surely say, what about God? If God exists, then surely he is the ultimate reality. Physics and all the rest are dependent on God, dependent not only on their initial creation, but for their continued existence. And in earlier generations, books like this one would have had to contain either an atheistic attack or a theistic defense of natural religion. And so then he talks about Russell and Mill, and he says matters of religion are matters of sexual preference. They're not to be discussed in public, and even abstract questions are discussed only by bores. What has happened? I think that most people would suppose there's been a decline of religious faith among the more educated sections of the population in Western Europe and North America. Perhaps that's true, but it seems to me that the religious urge is as strong as ever and takes all sorts of strange forms. I believe that something much more than a decline of religious faith has taken place. For us, the educated members of society, the world has become demystified, or rather, to put the point more precisely, we no longer take the mysteries we see in the world of expressions of supernatural meaning. We no longer think of odd occurrences as cases of God performing speech acts in the language of miracles. The odd occurrences are just odd occurrences. The result of these demystification is that we have gone beyond atheism to a point where the issue no longer matters in the way it did to earlier generations.
Yeah, but you're right. But in his vision of God, he obviously has a kind of nominalistic idea, right? God is a being, and God is this, God is arbitrary in relation to the world. But this is, of course, this is the issue. And so there's a deep relationship between the proper vision, or the more ancient vision of God as the absolute, as the source of being in the mystical way, and the mysticism of the world, that is the world as being imbued with meaning, imbued with a kind of brightness, Yep. But without that brightness, there's no physics and chemistry and all that stuff. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying relevance, this is what John Vervaeke's been great at showing us, that relevance precedes the identities, these kind of cold identities of facts that we describe in science.
That's
right. The question of relevance precedes that. And so in some ways, it's like, I wish Searle would have been there to have this discussion,
So here's the point that he thinks, and this is the bullseye where I think the problem lies. The fact that the world has become demystified to the point that religion no longer matters in the public way that it once did shows not so much that we are all becoming atheists, but that we have moved beyond atheism to a point where the issues have a different meaning for us. And so what I think Searle has solved the problem in a way which has destroyed meaning. And I think that the meaning and significant question, I think Searle's diagnostic work on language is fabulous. His diagnostic work on the Western rational tradition is fabulous. The problem is that his worldview is too restrictionist, and when push comes to shove, he robs the world of significance and meaning. Its telos goes away.
Yeah.
And so I love Searle because Searle is the antidote to the postmodernist subjectivism, their politically motivated subjectivism and all the way that goes at. But Searle can only ever be a diagnostic tool on that front. He can't actually solve the larger problems of meaning. So we use Searle. Searle is kind of like the way Christians use the law to know that we have sin. We hold up Searle as our standard to know when we have postmodernism and how it's wrong. But the problem is that Searle then restricts himself to that in a way which doesn't allow anything to break out, right? You can't get outside of that. You can't get to an ultimate telos. You can't get to an ultimate purpose. You can't get to an ultimate significance because you can't even get to morality because there are no oughts. All he has is an is, and it's a very sparse is. Particles moving in fields of forces. That's all he's got. And that's part of his problem. So his truth problem is that his definition of truth insofar as it goes up against the postmoderns is excellent. The problem is it's so restrictive that once he defeats the postmodernists, he goes, aha, back to nihilism now.
That's
and it's
right, back to particles and forces.
You're just bumping on the rubble of nihilism.
Huh. Well,
that's right. That's his problem.
What's the alternative then of meaning coming from somewhere?
That's what we're trying to find out.
Well, yeah, okay.
That's what I want to look at. That's what I want to.
Well, where does the sun?
Well, it's helpful to remember how we got here, in that the turn to empiricism and rationality come after the attempt, let's say by Luther, to resolve using texts and rationality to finally have unity. And what happened was Europe then fractures. And so then you have
unity. How can you define that or describe that? What Luther was groping for?
Well, Luther thought that if you applied rationality to this text, and he had a better text thanks to Erasmus, so you have this. Oh, we're good. If we can get to better texts and apply rationality to it, then we can stop indulgences and all of the evils.
People will just automatically know what's true.
Right.
Like they'll just read the text. They'll apply their reason to it, and then we'll just all agree because, it's obvious, right? What the text says right here, you can just see it, and then all the Jews will convert and everybody will just agree because it's like the text is clear,
okay.
Right?
And it didn't happen.
It certainly didn't happen.
And the alternative to that, or what preceded that then? You had a central authority. Well, and you had two authorities because you had the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church had already split by then I think over definitions of like little small, tiny little words, right? Is where they start to split.
In terms of the split between Orthodoxy and Catholicism,
there are many reasons.
There are a few reasons.
Yeah.
One is definitely a question of church structure, and the other is it is a theological question, which is a little more obtuse. But the idea is that in people's lives there's something you could call tradition, which I don't want to. It's a dirty word for contemporaries. Yeah. But what it means is that in some ways you inherit a kind of spirit, you inherit a kind of way of doing things, kind of way of seeing the world, and it's implicit. It's not something that is completely explicit. Right. If you ask someone, why they're shaking hands with somebody else and, how they do it or whatever, they can't explain it to you. They just inherit something from their parents. And so think of that as this connection between generations, which frames reality for you. And so there's a sense of it. Yeah, there's a sense of this implicit way of participating in the world.
And the role of the individual in that world is as a receiver.
Not just as a receiver. It's a fractal system, right? So there's a sense in which the things exist at different levels. You kind of receive and then you participate, and you enliven, you make things living. You don't just receive them.
Well, I'm trying to compare and contrast that to rebelliousness, our inherited protestation. Constantly,
Well, for sure,
we
the
don't
idea is
want
that what
fascism.
you
We see
receive-
fascism around every authoritarian corner, right?
We have a tradition which rejects the tradition. So we hand down the great tradition of not handing down traditions.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, it's like a weird anti-tradition tradition.
Okay.
Right.
It's like like I go to a Pentecostal church and they talk about how we don't have a liturgy, and I'm just like, no, you do. Liturgy is just talking about how you don't have one.
Yeah, but there's obviously a liturgy. It's always like one song, announcements, and then
That's
whatever,
right.
like a few
3
songs
fast,
and
3 so,
and a
1 to get
message.
ready and 1 to go. There's your liturgy.
That's right. That's a liturgy, dude.
Okay. So,
But Benjamin, what I just want to get to hammer this point in is that the idea, the traditional way of seeing it is that you have this spirit and then you have to live it. So it's not that you just receive, it's that you are embodying something. And so, let's say it could be something smaller, right? It could be, let's say, the tradition of a sports club. I like using those because they're non-political and people. So you have a culture, there's a team culture, there's a spirit of that team, and then new players can come in and old players can go out. But somehow you're able to preserve an embodiment of a culture and of a way of being in that group. And so think of that now at larger scales in terms of your family, in terms of your village, in terms of your community, and then ultimately, of course, also in terms of the way in which you would live your faith. It's this capacity to kind of embody continuity.
Yeah. To add a little complexity to that, when you talk about sports, at least in America, in modern times, that the Bears or the Bulls are not separated from the audience. So they do have their own culture, but they're also held together by attention, by belief, by fans or fanatics. So
Nobody controls it. It's not one person that can decide what the Bulls are. It's a to use a term I hate. It's an emergent property or whatever. Like it's a spirit. It's a spirit. Yeah, I like spirit or principality better. But it's something that is beyond any individual's capacity to control it.
That emergence thing. That's Searle's theory of mind, and the problem that J.P. Moreland points out to him is that you're emergent. Okay, how? It's a name where a theory should be, because it doesn't answer the question.
Okay,
that's good.
That's what
that's
David
a name for the
Bentley Hart
space
said.
where
That it was amazing. He said everybody thinks they know what they mean. It's like the word emergent. You could use magic and it would be the same. Oh, here there's emergent properties. Like, okay, you didn't explain anything.
Well, what's the question?
Science-y.
Yeah.
Emergence is science-y.
What's the question?
Yeah.
Then? If it's what's the what is it trying to? What are we pointing to when we say emergent? What are we
What
trying
brings
to?
forth?
What breaks forth?
something that
Brings forth.
So,
Bring forth. Okay.
So it's like this. This is the idea of emergence. I have a single molecule of water, of H2O. I have a single molecule of H2O. Is it wet? What if I have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10? How many of those molecules do I have to have? Eventually I get wetness, unless it's cold, in which case I get ice. But the behavior of the sum total of the molecules in a lattice structure creates a certain particular kind of viscosity, which results in either ice or liquid. And the hardness of the ice and the liquidity of the water are emergent properties that emerge from the behavior of the lower level phenomenon, namely the H2O molecules. Okay. That's emergence. Sometimes we can explain emergence like in water, where we say, look, it's the lattice structure of the individual molecules as they connect to each other and the crystallization of them, which forms ice. That's a good explanation. Sometimes we say, what's consciousness? Well, it emerges.
Yeah,
that's it. we just
and Jonathan, you're saying tradition is an emergent property. It's another we emerge into, or
no. What I mean is that it's not. There's nobody controlling it. Like there's no one who can control tradition with at whatever level you want to.
There's no person with skin on them controlling it.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously there's a sense in which there are principalities that control it. So you can identify, this is, now we're falling more in traditional theology, but there's a sense in which, let's say certain characteristics will have a coherence to them that you can see across whatever. A good example is like anger, right? So anger is something that obviously you don't totally control. It comes out in you and then you try to control it. But for some reason you can recognize anger across different people, and it all kind of looks the same, and nobody seems to be telling us what anger is, and so what the traditional thinking will say, well, there's a demon, there's a spirit, the spirit of anger, and then that is a way to represent all the commonalities between certain qualities.
Okay. So what do we do with Western rebelliousness, the quality, the emergent property of Western rebellion?
Yeah, it's a Luciferian. It's captured in traditional thinking. It's Luciferian, right? It's the idea of the light, right? The one who carries the light. That's who Lucifer is. Lucifer is the one who carries light, or the one who reflects the light. That they think they're the source of light. And so they think that they actually have it all and that they can replace their own source. And so the whole story of Satan, no matter how you represent it, has that basic pattern to it. It's like, I've got it, I'm going to take. So it's Promethean, it's Prometheus who's like, I'm going to go up the hill, I'm going to get what I'm being refused this from the things above me. So I'm going to replace the gods, take from the gods. There are different ways, there are different stories in this.
And how is he redeemed? How is the rebellious character redeemed? What's his plot arc? Like, how does he fulfill?
Christianity doesn't
devoured
end well
by
his,
what?
That one.
It doesn't end well.
Christianity, it doesn't end
Lake
well
of Fire.
For that one.
There is an archetypical story here.
Yeah.
There actually is an archetypical story. So there's going to be two threads here that we're going to have to weave. The first one is in this book, Social Justice and Cooperation Cooperation and Social Justice by Joseph Heath. That's a very recent volume. He talks about he does a chapter on immigration, and he talks about how the liberal is the man who can never take his own side in a fight. because they have to be pluralists about everything, and you have to rationally justify everything. Well, eventually you get down, and how do you rationally justify going against illiberalism? Well, now you're tolerant of intolerance, and so you have these paradoxes, and he says, look, if you view your society as cooperation, what you're really talking about is intergenerational cooperation. That's what you're doing. You're cooperating with your past. He's getting quite suspiciously close to Chesterton's Democracy of the Dead, right? If you understand Chesterton's idea. Now, he doesn't say that. Obviously, he's an atheist.
Democracy of the Dead would be the accumulated wisdom of our forefathers, or common law, or something like that.
It's the idea that a man's opinion shouldn't matter less just because other people happen to be walking around at a given moment. Right? Just because we happen to be alive at this particular moment doesn't make us more smart or more wise than the voices of the past. And so you give the dead a vote by taking into account their views and ideas.
So you already have a degree of respect for tradition. That's re-emerging.
Yeah. And so what he says is you're cooperating. He says, look, you are in everything, whatever it is you're inheriting, you're getting it from other people. And so he says, his idea for immigration, he says the very fact that immigrants are coming here and we're not going there means they want to join our system of cooperation, which implies what? They have to cooperate with us, which requires adopting what? And that's his answer over and against the liberals who can't do their thing, I mean, who can't take their own side in a fight.
Yeah.
With regard to the animating spirit behind a lot of this, it's an anti-authoritarian and a suspiciousness of authority, because of an over elevation of reason and merit and the pathologizing of the idea that anybody can legitimately have something or have a right to have something that they didn't get on rationally justified merit. And so what that means is there's no room for favor. If you push it far enough, and if this ever got into everything, you'd have to rationally justify falling in love.
Mm-hmm. Well, consent culture, right? Yeah, you have to say yes before and after every kiss, right?
Yes, but take it a step further. Not only would you have to rationally justify falling in love, you'd have to rationally justify falling in love with one person over another.
Yeah,
which means you'd have an inequality there, which means you'd have to deconstruct your inequality, which means you'd have to deconstruct your preference, right? And so when you take liberalism and you try the elevation of liberalism from a system of conflict resolution to a lens through which we try to live through the world and create meaning is the problem. Yeah. Liberalism was expanded to be a thing it was never meant to do.
Yeah.
This is never what it was for. This is taking the hammer and saying, it'll be my hammer, it'll be my fork, it'll be my knife, it'll be my spoon. It's how I'm going to wash myself. This is how I'm going to, no, I'm going to drink from my hammer. No. Hit nails with it. That's it. The tenets of liberalism were never meant to be the tenets of personal ethics, behavior. It was never to help to figure out what's meaningful. And so when people say you want to dethrone liberalism, I say, no, I love liberalism. I'm a classical liberal, but I'm classical in that I want to put liberalism back where it belongs.
Yeah.
It's right now, it's expanded to try, and people are trying to now cash out the terms of their meaning. And most importantly, the validity of their action and what they find meaningful on liberal grounds. But liberalism doesn't have the resources to cash out what's meaningful or not. And so when you try to justify your meaningful behavior and actions and ethics on terms of liberalism, you're going to have a bit of a tough time. Yeah. And when the postmodernists deconstruct your logos while you're at it, what you're left with is nothing. It's a flat surface and everything has been wiped away. And so what
if what's left is actually the opposite? Like one of the things we're seeing, and I think this is something that I only understood in the past 5 years, I would say, because I was struggling to understand it. It's like, it's actually, what you end up with is like a satanic hierarchy. That is, it doesn't end flat. It ends with an opposite hierarchy. Yeah. It ends with, it's as if, it's like the tenets of liberalism, they don't hold. And so you say, for example, you say everybody's equal, everybody's equal, everybody's equal. When you look around, like nobody's equal, like everybody's different, everybody has different qualities, but everybody has. So you push, and then because it doesn't hold, you actually have to over stress. So now you don't say men and women are as strong as each other. You have to say women are stronger than men. Yeah. So it's not that now it's not that, let's say, the stranger that comes in is equal to you. No. The stranger that comes in is better than you. So what you end up doing is you don't end up with a flat thing. You end up with an upside down thing, like an upside down hierarchy. Well, where now, you saw, Benjamin, you saw it in the university, right? You saw, it's like where the exception of the exception, the person that can capture all the oppression points has right to speak is like the top of
divine
the
authority
of meaning.
And you have a king. You just have a disabled trans indigenous immigrant, undocumented immigrant king. But there he is.
Heath talks about that actually in a separate essay on the redistribution of social status. He says, in your attempts to redistribute social status, what do you have to do? You have to say that person's lower than that person, so we're going to fix them. But in doing that, you reify the problem. So instead of the only way to account for that is to go overboard and to pathologize anything that might give someone social status. And he says, part of the problem is in extending equality to every realm, rather than what we should be doing is saying, look, there's a large iterated number of games, and also we're going to stop the status from one game from bleeding over into the other. We're going to have an order, right? We're going to have a restricted level of you can't go here, you can't
But who decides?
But the problem is and the only way to build those boundaries is to use power. Yeah. And that is the thing that we have pathologized into oblivion. And so what you end up with is a situation where you have a whole pile of people who are all trying to gain power without looking like they're gaining power. And Heath actually lampoons this a little bit because he says the most high status thing you could say is, I don't care about status. You don't need to care about status. You've got plenty of it. That's why. It's like a rich man saying, I don't worry about money. Well, of course not. You've got $1 billion in the bank. Why would you be? So it's like a humble brag in a certain way to say, I don't care about status. And so his point is that he's like, of course you don't care about status. That's a very high status thing for you to say. And because you're a university professor and because you have lifetime tenure and because you can't be fired, you could say things like that without any repercussions. Whereas the guy who's barely hanging on, if he says, I don't care about what my status is, it's like, well, he could get fired and lose his job and not be able to feed his kids. And so we've got this problem where it's exactly what you said, Jonathan. I completely agree. In order to try and create that absolute egalitarianism of everything, which was never supposed to be a part of liberalism, but it is a part of this sort of suspicion of power that reaches into, and the idea that all hierarchies are inherently the result of cynical and tyrannical power grabs. We've created a situation where we have to overcompensate in the other direction to say that, I am so not xenophobic that I actually prefer strangers to myself. Now, that's already being problematized as well. Oh, you're fetishizing them as a way of making yourself look good in your own will to power. Barbara Applebaum being good, being white. So now you can't even do that. What you have to do is turn yourself into a little more than an environmental accoutrement that doesn't have any impact in society at all. You just become like a shrub in the back.
That's right. But this is fetishized, in storytelling. Like when I saw the new Planet of the Apes, I couldn't believe it. Like I just couldn't believe that story. It's like human beings watching a movie where animals are taking over our world and we're cheering. Like we're cheering our own disappearance, right? It's like the invading alien is actually the good guy and we're horrible. And thank God that the apes are taking over our world. It's like, how can anybody watch this and not like want to just kill themselves?
Yeah, if you watch those David Attenborough nature films, like over the course of time, he becomes more and more anti-human, and until there's this one series, it was on Netflix or on Disney, where he goes through all these different habitats, and at the end of every episode, here's how human beings are destroying it. And then the last episode is they go to Chernobyl. And it's this utopia for him because they thought that nature was going to be over when humanity destroyed it. But no, it just humanity destroyed itself, and now nature comes back. And this is how the world should be. All these adaptive others ruling over me.
Well, I am so see. I care so little about status that I'm willing to wipe out all of humanity, and I'm so enlightened.
But where do
that's
you?
Why I should be given. That's why I should be given several awards for my work, and you should hire me to make your movies.
The opposite direction, though, is authority. Returning to authority. Returning to hard power. Right?
No, that's not. So I don't think that's true. So there are characters. You asked this question before, and we didn't really get to it, which is that how is the Luciferian character redeemed? And I said it doesn't end well for the devil. He ends in fire. But there are examples of Luciferian characters in our storytelling that actually exemplify that for us. I think Robin Hood is a great example. So what Robin Hood does is he's in a situation of kind of upside down order, of a illegitimate situation where the wrong person is king. But Robin Hood doesn't want to become king, right? Robin Hood doesn't want to take power. And so he becomes a trickster and a thief and an outsider. But all that he's doing is actually there to restore the legitimate king.
Well, yeah, but there's still a legitimate king. There's still hard power. Comes back. I mean, if you're not fighting for the restoration of the monarchy,
you just conceive it as power, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, in
defense of liberalism and Protestants.
Okay.
Protestantism, liberalism, we might think of it this way: it can be good medicine, but it's bad food. Okay. Because it can address the tyranny. And your question about redemption is, in fact, the redemptive story of Christianity. Look at the parable of the tenants and the vineyard. The tenants take over the vineyard from the far-off king, and the king sends messengers and says, hey, it's my vineyard.
Yeah.
And they kill the messengers. Surely they will respect my son, he says in the Gospel of Matthew. And, of course, that's setting up to the crucifixion of Christ, who is not respected, but then the hidden king redeems at least some of the rebels. Peter is saved, Judas is lost, and that's how this thing continues to lay out.
But there's still a king. There's still a return of the king.
Yes, there's still a king.
There has to be.
So where do we find the king after liberalism? I mean, if liberalism isn't serving everything that we need it to, then one thing that it's knocked out of place is authority, right? So how do we return to authority?
Always emerge.
Okay.
So I would
that's
say
what I'm
there's
saying.
actually a
So
story that discusses this.
If we get wary every time we mention power, we're like, oh, we don't want power. Like, no, power's coming. Power's returning.
No, that's right. You need power. There definitely is power. There definitely is authority. But that authority has to be the idea of the right authority, right? Is in the sense
legitimate.
Legitimate. I know it's weird because we don't think that there is such a thing as legitimacy, but legitimate power is the power that exists where it is and then lets power and authority exist at the levels that are below it.
Okay.
And so you can recognize illegitimate authority when it competes with levels that aren't theirs. So an authoritarian government is one that tries to tell you what to do in your family, tries to like completely control. It basically thinks your children belong to them. That's a sign of authoritarianism, because it's actually trying to compete with levels of reality that don't belong to it. A legitimate authority exists where it is, and then understands that there are constituents of it that aren't completely filled with their authority. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well,
Remind me in a second to talk about the Mighty Ducks.
Oh,
But
Mighty
Searle
Duck.
talks. Yeah, that movie. Searle talks about that exact dynamic in the Campus War, where he says that what ends up happening is that the professors who are liberal are so wanting to elevate reason over and above power that they think that any failure of the administration to get the rebels to recognize the authority of the university is a problem on the part of the administration, because if the administration can't win the rebels over, they must not have used good enough reason and logic and evidence. Rather than realizing that the rebels don't care about that, they're after power.
well, yeah, but they're all after power now. They're all rebels. I'm saying there's no legitimate king. We
Right.
can
And so
critique
that's where
the
the Mighty
fact that
Ducks
we are
comes in.
in the rebellious. We are rebels.
Right.
But are we not rebels
There's-
looking for a king?
So there's the justification and the legitimate use of power, and that comes through something like authority. We're not in the authority, if I get to tell you what to do, that in the sense of authority of he is an authority on the issue of biology or whatever it is.
We should talk about subversive submission, though, because you have this strange case in the New Testament where you have Paul of Tarsus in Romans 13 talking about the legitimacy of Roman authority, who on one hand saves his butt in Jerusalem and will eventually put him to death.
and
And he
that's,
lives in that space.
Okay.
and I want to touch on the Mighty Duck because it's the perfect
Mighty
thing for
Ducks.
this.
I can't wait to hear about
That
the Mighty
movie.
Ducks.
The movie has this older man who runs a skate shop named, I believe his name is Hans. There's the hotshot lawyer who gets caught on he's an alcoholic, and he has to coach this kid's team. And there's a kid on the team named Charlie. And those are three iterations of kind of, you could think of it, the stages of a man's life. And the lawyer used to be the hotshot, great player, whatever happens. And he has to learn to take on his own responsibility in terms of coaching the hockey team. And in doing that, he has to teach Charlie, who's the guy on his team who becomes the leader of his team, because the team is terrible. They have no equipment. They're all poor kids.
The Bad News Bears.
Yeah.
Bad News Bears on ice.
And so they get a kid named Adam Banks, who was the hot shot from the team across town, who's all the wealthy kids or whatever. And so now Charlie has to learn to become the leader on a team where he's not the best player. His coach has to learn to become the leader of that guy. And all of it comes down from Hans, who's this wise older man. Okay? That story iterates itself through all three of those movies. But in the third movie, there's this scene where two of the kids, Charlie and his friends, say, hey, let's skip class there, I think in grade 12. We'll go to the amusement park. Yeah, that's what we used to do. And it's I want to go back and be a kid again. And so they go to this amusement park, and they're sitting around, and it's just like, it's kind of sad and pathetic because they're like on these rides that they're too big for, and they're eating cotton candy while like kids half their size are running around circles on them. And you could just see it's this stepping back from that rightful place of authority and from that level of maturity, and it's refusing to step into the thing that they could really be. And so one of the things that movie does is it demonstrates what proper wisdom and authority looks like in the figure of Hans. It shows how a guy like Charlie, who's the young guy, will fall into line and submit once the hotshot coach gets his act together. The other one follows behind it. So when there's that ideal and someone starts following in behind that ideal and expressing it, there's this sort of, not emergent, but there's this kind of natural inclination, this there's this internal teleological compass which points us in that direction and gives us reason to call underneath and to fall into that authority. And you can see that. And that's a paradigmatic story that used to exist. The rebel who finds his mentor and then who's too big for the people around him and then breaks the authority that's withholding him, but then finds the larger authority which can hold his ability and then submits to that. Right. And I think something like that is what we're trying to aim at. That was a movie I watched as a little kid, and I was able to find mentors in the various places where I was going in. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And if you want to look at it out of the crass political frame, so you've got Biden and Trump. You've got Biden, who is a Roman Catholic, and you've got Trump, who's by no means a church-going. Trump poses with the Bible, and you get these weird moments where on one hand, when he's posing with the Bible, it's like, you're such a fraud. On the other hand, when he's posing with the Bible, you almost get the sense of, but there's something, at least he's recognizing in this, that Biden is struggling with. And it's exactly that dynamic that we have a sense, which isn't completely obliterated in us, of moments when the world is right. And that's when we have the sense of proper authority, that, as Jonathan says, understands its place and exercises its authority within its realm, and not tyrannically, because what that proper authority does is allow its power to not suppress the use of power, but the flourishing of other proper, appropriate powers to actually bring flourishing to the world overall. That's what we have a hunger for. And even though we're deeply compromised, there are moments in stories and music and in our own lives where we see it and we say, but it takes a faith that, which is the faith that when Christ goes to the cross by submitting, he shows all this worldly power. And the question is, why on earth would he stay on that cross? Yeah. What kind of craziness does keep him on that cross? And then even in the resurrection, if the American government were to put me to death, Joe Biden hated me or Donald Trump hated me, and I popped out of the grave, the White House would be my first stop, and I'd knock on the door. I'd say, how do you like me now? Christ doesn't do that. And that shows he's king.
Okay.
Yeah, when he rises from the dead, he never says, I told you so.
No.
Well, kind of to Thomas, a little bit. There's a nod, a little bit.
But it's an invitation into the kind of faith that I think the Mighty Ducks story points to.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you could understand that if you've seen a proper family, the way it functions, that's exactly the way it functions. So the father obviously has authority. The father has power, but all his power and authority is directed toward making his children powerful and having authority at the proper level. And so because he wants his son to replace him, he wants his son to become, as much as he can. So it's not that we refuse or that we see authority as good. And then we notice that if it's well used, then it tends to raise everybody up.
And there's a difference, and that because how do I put this? There's a cleaving of the idea of authority. One is who's been given the authority, the proper social authority to act. And then there's authority in terms of actually having knowledge and character, et cetera, et cetera. And there's this thing that occurs where people are endlessly trying to undermine any form of action of legitimate authority. And so we've kind of decided that it's we have a justice system where it's better to let 10 guilty men go free than to convict an innocent man. We've kind of decided with authority, it's best to have none at all than to have one single person exercise it illegitimately. And so we see all power as being really just the mask for various interests. Rather than, and we've pathologized all of the standards, teleological standards, moral standards, epistemic standards, as being merely the product of interests.
And now, when we do that, we surrender to nihilism and we surrender to cynicism. Right. And we see that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you guys are witnessing with your events are young people, men and women are hungering to for something, and you talk about self-development and fixing each other's problems and helping it, camaraderie. So what's the emergent direction? Where are they going to? Again, I know you already explained it, but
you're practicing. You can't have a group. People can't have a sense of shalom and community together unless they actually practice these things, unless they listen, unless they respect a certain established authority. They expect other arenic authorities in the room that have traditional constituted rules about behavior towards one another. And in a sense, that the act of coming together in person, not online, because online I can give Benjamin Boyce the finger and unsubscribe from his channel. But in person, if you're going to enact shalom, you have to practice these virtues, just like with a family.
Ask a question.
yeah, love questions.
Jesus has this question where the authorities bring him a man and say, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Jesus responds by healing him. So now the Pharisees are the opposites of say, well, you're not allowed to do supernatural acts on the Sabbath. It's like, he did supernatural acts. Who do you think you're talking to here, right? And Jordan Peterson is not God. Neither is Jocko Willink. Neither is Andrew Huberman. Neither is Andrew Schultz. But these are men who are exercising authority and teaching authority within their respective realms, and young men are flocking to it. Particularly, I would say, Jordan, Huberman, Jocko Willink, Chris Williamson. There's a whole sphere of this, and it's people who are within their realm of expertise, who stay in their lane, who cross-pollinate with one another and walk in their rightful place. And those people are starting to get escape velocity from the orbit of nihilism, because the reinstitution, I wouldn't even say reemergence, the reinstitution of legitimate authority is starting to take hold. And part of what legitimizes authority more than anything else, I mean, sure, we've got credentialing institutions and all that, but the ability to navigate life in the world is a massive socially legitimating tool. So the question I would want to talk about to John and Paul is, how do we see that going forward? And is there something there around which a properly constituted movement could wrap itself? If I made any sense there at all.
As long as it's on screens, it's only two-dimensional.
Yeah, well, that's why, I mean, I always say, if you listen to my channel, you'll say I'm always telling people to go to church, and there's a explicit aspect to that, which is, yeah, you should go to church. But there's also just a general idea that you should be involved in human communities, and that the online guru sphere, it can help. It's like, it can kind of pry you. It can start your engine, you could say, but then that has to be enacted. And so I think that the family, the community, the church, these are the proper places for this to take shape. And it is going to happen ground up, because I don't see anything from the top that's going to change in any time soon. And so what I think will rather happen is that as the world starts to fray and start to become more decomposed and tyrannical, there will be bright lights that will appear, and those bright lights will attract others to it. And so the idea of having children, being involved in your family, of connecting to a community that you don't completely choose, right? That's not just your friends, but that you kind of have to deal with the reality of a community. If those that will be able to do that successfully will become like beacons, I think. And that, like I said, as things kind of break down, they will rise. These things will rise. I don't know how. I don't know which one. I don't know what. But that, I think, is the only way to go about it.
And that's been the story historically, as you know, the Roman Empire continues to sort of, especially in the West, as it frayed, it tended to be, you know, if you look at, let's say, a sand dune becomes habitable land because plants start to clump, and then they begin to cover, and that begins to set up a dynamic. And so there's family, there's churches, but these things are going to have to function and give people the sense of this is the way things should be. Not perfectly, not completely, but better than the alternatives. And then you will see the reconstitution of authority, of order, of roles, of tradition. It happens again and again and again in history.
Is it possible that, because all of these, that whole sphere, it's all men, it's all experts in their field, it's all guys who are strong. Is it possible that I know it's in 2D, but is it possible that there's some sort of, that it's not merely about, you know, Andrew Huberman's expertise in dopamine or Jordan Peterson understanding how the prefrontal cortex works, but that these men are archetypical fathers and are pointing out like are like a bat signal of dadness being flashed into the sky of the internet, and that's making men go, oh, that's
what I want. Like, you're right. I think you have a point, and I think that's not that it has value. It has value because it's similar to what you've said, is that people, we actually, especially men, women too, by the way, but men, especially in this moment, we love seeing greatness. We rejoice when we see, you know, now it's been reduced to things like sports or whatever, where we see someone who does something great and excellent. We love it. And so, but we don't just love it watching physical prowess. We love it in anything. Like, we see someone being good at their job. I hate accounting with all my soul, but when I see a good accountant and he knows what he's doing and he's on it, I'm like, that is amazing. Like, I admire them, even though it's something that I have nothing akin to. And so I think that's something that, like you said, people are hungry for. And so when we see these figures appear and that they have a kind of excellence in their life, you know, it's attractive. So I think it can have a positive effect if it's then not just entertainment, which is of course the danger, is if we don't live through these figures and we just watch them get that kick, like we watch a movie and get the kick from watching the hero in the movie, and then go back to, you know, to being overweight and bored. So that's why it has to land. Like, it has to land in you transforming your life and becoming excellent in something, you know.
Yeah, and it has to. The reality, just like the difference, you know, a television show, 40 minutes, the world is set right. A movie, 2 hours, the world is set right. All of us spend all of our lives, and the world is not yet set right. Hebrews 11. Abraham never finally gets to the promised land. Moses doesn't actually cross over. David is an amazing king, but he stumbles and, in a sense, you know, loses a precious child because he couldn't keep his eyes and his hands off his neighbor's wife and not kill a faithful servant in order to cover it up. I mean, this is our story. And so in reality, being a father, being a neighbor, being a churchman, being a citizen of a community is far harder and far longer than the little inspirational dopamine hits we get when we see Peterson or any other YouTube guru land a good point.
Yeah. Heroes.
How? Because what is part of a question for me is, how do we get the online, because the online thing is making it kind of okay to hold those views, because you could point and say, well, this guy said it. How do we walk that out from merely being a thing that we participate in an online community to bring it forth out into the world?
Yeah. Well, there are ways, I think there are different ways that's happening. You know, if you probably know a little bit about this whole arc thing that Jordan is putting together, that I'm also involved with.
What is it?
It
What does
is
it
in
stand
some way,
for?
it's the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
Oh, okay.
And so in some ways the name
Launching on Reformation Day. Did he know that?
No, I didn't know that. That's not my choice. So the idea is mostly in some ways to create certain locus, like events, to have places that people can see, and they can also find cover in people that have opinions that they don't think they're allowed to have, let's say, in terms of this idea of excellence, of seeing this notion of a family as a value, all these ideas that are kind of being pressed down upon by certain cultural forces, to be able to have a stage where that can be represented and people can aim at and find cover in. I think Jordan Peterson has been great for that, where he's a reasonable person. He has his fault, but he's a decent man. He was married, who has children, and so he says things, and then people can say, well, if he said it, I can aim that way. So of kind of building that out into a kind of movement, I think is something that I'm definitely throwing my part of my energy into, hopefully to see that come forward.
What's
So we'll
the
see.
content of this? Like, is there work coloring books, workshops?
Oh, it's starting as a conference. ARC is going to be a conference it's in early November, late October, early November. And
Reformation Day.
Yeah, Reformation Day, I guess.
In London.
So
okay.
it's for now it's invitational. It's invitation only, and it's mostly to create a kind of elite and a movement of people that don't want the transhuman, anti-human narratives that have been taking over, that are kind of just pro-human, pro-family, and also this idea of subsidiarity, of understanding authority and community as existing from the individual all the way to the state, and not just massive, controlling structures and scattered individuals. Basically proposing a worldview. And then hopefully growing so that more people can participate. But at the outset, it's going to be a lot of invitee kind of politicians. And
is it explicitly or implicitly religious? And can it function without religion?
I don't think it can function without religion. And so I'm going public saying this. I took comfort in noticing that most of the people involved in the organizing committee are dedicated Christians. There are a few exceptions, but it's difficult. It's difficult to make it explicitly religious without freaking the entire world out. So I think it's not going to be explicitly religious, but I do believe that without a transcendent, without a look towards something which is transcendent to human reason and to human capacity, I don't think that it can succeed.
Why do you think that the world will freak out if it's explicitly religious? Why would the world have a problem with explicitly religious, responsible humanity, cultural?
Well,
movement?
because the entire, let's say, Western narrative since the French Revolution has been ramping up towards the idea that all religious institutions are exactly what Wokal was describing, are exactly only veiled power, veiled interests, whether it's to make money or to control others. And so people it's very difficult at this moment in time to propose that the religious is a constitutive part of what makes us human, that it's necessary. But I think that ultimately, if it's going to succeed, these things are going to have to become more transparent. Like, we're going to have to be able to talk about it at least. But yeah, hopefully we'll get there.
There is a thing that occurs where it's the pathologizing of any sort of authority at all. And this sort of like willful basking in the glow of, well, there's no authority here. The chief expression of this in the Christian sphere, and Paul would know this, I don't know if Jonathan would know, would be Jesus and John Wayne, where it's all of the structures are corrupt. And how do you know that? Well, I'm a historian. Is the history faculty corrupt? We might want to ask. Never mind. And so there's this tearing down, and my friend James Lindsay has talked about how there's a certain way where people want to criticize their way into authority, it's not that they gain authority. It's not that they step into authority. It's just they mow down everyone else around them, so they're the last one standing, and everyone's looking to them. And it's like, well, I didn't build a platform for myself. Well, no, you kind of didn't. I mean, there's a woman online, I won't say her name, but she has a book out about how she doesn't have any platforms. She's got a large Twitter following. She does many interviews. She does, and so it's this whole thing of like the criticism, they hold on to just enough of their own authority to validate their own criticism until the next person come along and criticizes them. And it's this circular firing squad of all these people trying to demonstrate that they're not after authority in order so that they can get the sort of status and prestige necessary to be listened to. Well, why do you want to be listened to? What's your goal? What interests do you have? And so there's this circular firing squad. And so one of the things that we're going to have to do is tell stories and narratives which the satirical, caustic, snide, sarcastic, ironic, free, indirect discourse, the discursive bite of that criticism is unable to take down.
And that comes with the building of real things. As much as I'm, when I saw Jonathan's picture on the Arc page, I was very much relieved because I trust Jonathan, because I know where his heart's at. And I love Jordan. I don't know Jordan as well as I know Jonathan, but I do want to push back from the thinking in this world of screens, and this is going to make Grim Grizz put this on his channel, this world of set, and by set he means both the Egyptian god and the television set, of that these are big things, because the thing that undermines exactly what you're talking about here, Wokal, is a real thing. And that's where I think Jordan Peterson's Clean Your Room starts there. But that Clean Your Room is sort of an individual thing, and I would say if you're in a committed relationship, marry the person. If you're in a marriage, figure out how to not let it slip into divorce. If you are divorced, figure out how to effectively co-parent. In other words, showing competency and excellency at whatever this level of proper domain is will give a reality that that all of these deconstructors really have a difficult time with. Yeah. There's this morning I saw this. There's this thing on Twitter now of there's a trans ballerina and a female ballerina. They're doing exactly the same moves, side by side. And it's best to keep that captionless, because if you sort of watch it, you learn something. And when Scott Adams talks about AI, his conclusion with AI is that once we have enough AI, we will really learn that beneath human beings, there's no there. There's nothing beneath us. But what I would say, the best way to attack the nihilism is to, within your life, in your own proper domain, construct a real thing. And because what happens when you have a real thing is that it shines. And when you see a good father or a good mother or a good employee, they may become the victims of a tyrannical system, but everybody in the office sort of knows, and that reality is durable and redemptive.
One of the reasons that I ask that is because there is that cynical narrative. Boy, that's had some power, man.
Oh yeah.
And it feels kind of stale at this point, to be honest. I'm hoping that
it's devolving and cracking into cringe. What I'm hoping is that the sort of snide, snarky tone which gave those things its bite becomes the kind of thing where it used to be if someone did that to you, that was a sick burn, you lost. Where a person could just look and say, I appreciate your sarcasm. Do you actually have a point? And the audience kind of goes, yeah, do you have a point? Because at a certain level, you can, that when it starts showing up, when that snide, sarcastic, what Mark Leela says in the New Yorker Review of Books, they're long on attitude and short on argument, when that first starts showing up, and it's tying itself to certain things, they might have a point about some stuff, like maybe there was racial discrimination, yeah. And so when they're tying their sarcasm to something like that, it's fine. But then that tone, that snide discourse becomes like a signature thing. And that cynicism becomes enveloped into being the heart of that deconstructive enterprise. And as soon as you throw that snide sarcasm back at them, like I remember when Kevin DeYoung did a review of Beth Allison Barr's book, and he threw in some sarcasm and oh my stars, how could you? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, Dumais and Barnes and these other people all go on about how I don't want to defer. I'm engaging in difference. I want to make sure that I'm aware and intervening. So, and all of this, and you sit there and be like, has it ever occurred to you that perhaps I will not be deferent to you? Well, I have a PhD in history. That's great. Shall we take a look at the racist history of your university and the racist history of the tenure system? And shall we deconstruct your views on that behalf? And so they don't know or don't care that their cynicism is now gotten to the point where they're all getting attacked too. And eventually, more important than anything else, it's destined to become boring. Because there's only so many times you can say, oh, really?
Well, then you have an opposite
before
movement.
People start going like, all right, here we go again.
You have
if a surgeon is like, you're only curing my cancer because you'd like to gain status. In my response, like, cure me, man. Give this man some status. Everyone got some status we can give this dude, because I'd love to give him some. At a certain point, that argument begins to lose its bite. And I'm hopeful that it is starting to become cringe. I want it to crack and ossify into cringe, so that it loses all of its social cachet and becomes low status. And I don't mean in a new sincerity kind of way. I mean in a way where people are like, we don't really care about interests. We care about truth, goodness, and beauty. Those things exist. And all of your smarmy sarcasm and seeing through everything except for yourself, buy a mirror, pal. See if you see through that.
Do you see where are you seeing this? Like, I don't know exactly where this is. It has sway anymore. It sounds like old hat stuff. Like what I'm seeing now is emerging like did you see this clip? Yes. There's one of the senator or representatives that got kicked out of the Tennessee courthouse. He comes out with this big afro.
He did the MLK
thing. And then you see a video from 3 or 4 years ago of him like being a total straight-laced, totally not that character at all. But him and Dylan Mulvaney, who's been a girl for 36 days, which is, if you go back and watch it, it's a total parody. But then everybody has to believe in it. So I don't see sarcasm and irony reigning anymore. I see it's like this, Drew Barrymore, like receiving communion from Dylan Mulvaney in that picture. It's like this protestation to the fakeness, or like the simulacra, and is that's what's going on now. Like I think that the irony stuff doesn't work anymore. The sarcasm stuff doesn't work anymore. It's this cartoonish caricature of reality, or
cartoonish empathy. I guess what I'm saying is it's not just the irony and the cynicism and that sort of, I'm talking about in terms of an attack on the traditional, an attack on the real.
Okay.
But I also think there is an extent to which the sober-minded, thoughtful voice of a wise man or person saying, that's not true, no, is no longer, has more gravity and weight to it than the overabundance of empathy and compassion done for the sake of dodging a charge of bigotry.
Well, so are you saying that
Which is what's going on with
Matt Walsh
Drew
is the way? Matt Walsh is the way, like the way that he's come out with the against the trans stuff.
He has a strong spined posture, but I don't say Matt Walsh is the way, because I don't think he's always sober in what he's doing. I think it's a bit too performative sometimes and over the top. But I think it's hard to think of a perfect paradigm case, but I think of Jordan Peterson sitting with Kathy Newman,
Yeah.
and using minimal necessary force and maintaining his composure in the face of utter nonsense. I think that kind of posture is going to start to gain significant clout, persuasive power, prestige, viability. The histrionic empathy, or on one hand, and the caustic nihilism on the other, are both going to begin to crack and break under the weight of something that's stronger, that's grounded, that has rightful authority, speaks from a place of what is good, that is transcendently grounded in something that's absolute, and therefore walks and is assured of its voice because of its groundedness, and is not willing to step outside of its bounds. I think that is going to start to have, I hope that starts to have tremendous persuasive power and weight.
I
That make
think
sense?
I completely understand and agree with your hope, but a firm faith in the truth, I think, helps us remember that hope is finally grounded in the truth and not necessarily in the popularity of the truth. The popularity of the truth is a blessed thing to see and pursue, because it means that the world is better than not having it. But again, part of, sorry, I'm a Christian minister. I always go back to this Christian story. You do the right thing, obviously never to be popular, but because it is right, and because you trust it is the right thing. And you might be wrong. And the good person, the good human being, is always ready to be corrected, because they are often wrong. Yet again, the best response to rampant cynicism and devolution in the world is be the right father or the right employee or the right mother. Be faithful to your kids. Be faithful to your spouse. And it is tremendously difficult, and it is in fact cruciform, because it costs you everything. And in the end, you might even get crucified for doing the right thing, but you still do it. And in the Christian story, the reward of this and the validation and vindication of this is resurrection. And that's part of why the cost of secularity has been so heavy, because it left us with the cross, but not with the empty tomb. And if you have a cross without an empty tomb, you can easily devolve into cynicism.
Because my life has been down both sides, and I have not always been excellent in or followed the Christian way in terms of how I've conducted myself. To put it mildly. I always say I like Christianity more than other people, because some of us have actually done some sins in our time. Everyone sins, but some of us were good at it, unfortunately. I don't know what I would do without a redemptive arc, or the possibility of a redemptive arc. I don't know where I'd go. And part of why I think that Jordan took off the way that he did is because he said, he gave people, you can fix your life. It's the nearest smell of a redemptive arc that a lot of people have had in probably a long time. And he modeled it excellently, particularly in those years. And even when he had the benzodiazepine thing, people were like, ah, ha, ha, ha. And I sat and I watched. I said, if he pulls himself out of this and comes stronger, that's proof of concept. And lo and behold, his influence is now actually greater, and he's more human. And the scope of what he's doing is now, I would say, shifting the pillars of Western civilization in real and profound ways. Through my following, but even prior to that, I worked in politics. Every man under the age of 35, and I started in my late 20s, every man under the age of 35 was watching Jordan Peterson. Almost all of them. Because he modeled that. This is how you do it. And all the wisdom which had been lost had been unspoken in terms of, well, just do whatever you want, whatever you see right, whatever you see fit, whatever you feel like, and that empathetic. And so I hope, part of the hope that I have that this becomes popular is based in the fact that I think that what we are building is grounded ultimately in the transcendentals, in truth, goodness, and beauty. And that those provide an objective frame of reference and an objective loci, a linchpin upon which to build a logos.
Yeah, I don't know if you can.
That's why I hope it can become popular, because every time someone hitched their wagon to the logos, like, the logos has a very good track record, I have to say. And so that gives me hope. Now, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's true.
The problem with the transcendentals is that you have to see them. You have to experience them. You have to, and that takes discipline. It takes practice. It takes, I think you actually do need a spiritual practice, beyond a religious belief or a narrative, like a spiritual practice, by which I mean, like you talk about, Jonathan, working on your attention, really working on your attention. And I think through prayer and, I think personally through prayer or worship, comes to me the ability to actually perceive the beautiful, the true beautiful, and the true, and the good. But before you can even follow those things without them becoming false idols or hollow, aspirational terms, you do need that that perception of them, and the only way to get to that perception of them is through a spiritual practice, and that's ultimately what, for me, in my point of view, religion contains the spiritual practice. Religion is the vessel for that spiritual practice. And so when people are looking for religion or seeing that religion can help me gain meaning, it's not just a set of beliefs. It's not just a bunch of precepts or a bunch of narratives. And those things are all important parts of it, but there's a reality inside of that. And it's impossible to communicate that reality through my voice, or through my words. I can feel it, and if I get close enough, maybe I start to radiate it. I don't know, but that constant pursuit of it, I think, is really important. The development of that internal life is really important. And so I just want to say that because there's an inside to religion that is not just faith, belief, practice, and community. All those things are good, but there's also this other thing. There's this very special thing. There's a holiest of holies inside of that holy spot. That's my spiel. Jonathan, what's your spiel?
No, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that, let's say, one of the things, because people, I'll make my pitch for religion, like basic religion, in the sense that, one of the answers we hear to what you said is something like, well, I can just do whatever, right? I could just do whatever spiritual practice. I could do yoga, do breathing, do all, have the Sam Harris meditation app or whatever. Like, whatever works for you, right? Whatever works for you. So and I think that one of the reasons why people think that is because it does have an effect. Like it can help you to some extent. But the problem is that reality scales, right? It's not just you. It's not just you on the internet. And so what traditional going to church provides is also a link of that all the way through, all the way up. And so, it's like you can worship together, and then, you have it's not just you that is working on your attention, but it's your whole family and then your whole community that's working on attention. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I do think that kind of contemporary, buffet spirituality is it's tempting, but it also leads to more fragmentation, because then everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and it's like whatever makes sense to me, and that obviously leads people kind of becoming their own little worlds that don't connect well to others. So
so when earlier when I was talking about building real things, there's a scaling up of that. And I think Jordan Peterson talks about this in really helpful terms. He's really got a way of, and Jonathan, I think, describes it very well. He's really got a way of sort of building these things from the ground up for people who are, by virtue of their formation in our culture, instinctively reactive to what has been categorized as the supernatural. This has to scale for you and your future self. This has to scale for the people next to you and their future selves. And so what we look for is, in fact, what you find in communal religions is built in already the fact that the practices have to sort of align with this equilibrated state. So that, and that's the reason why real religions tend to build real civilizations, and we can, with a degree of humility, we can say, well, we can evaluate religions to the degree that they in fact build healthy, robust, durable, life-giving civilizations. And so I think this is when one thinks about, in other words, my religious practice should make me a better foundation for a family and a church and a neighborhood and a city and a nation. And if multiple people are practicing these things, that health sort of levels up and levels out. And this is really what we're looking for and striving for.
Yeah, well, okay, so maybe we don't need a king, but well, see, this is the thing. Like, this is just the problem that keeps on confronting me to confront other people with. We either need we need king and a god. We need a king. Eventually, we need somebody at the highest point. We need one king, and you can't have that without God, and you can't have a good life without. And it's hard to explain to the post Christians, the atheists and the secularists, because it's like a regression, like going back to believing in things. But I don't see how atheism can scale anything other than just being a harbinger for progressivism. That's what happened with the new atheist movement, and the liberal non-religious government that we have now is just foisting up this progress pride flag that looks like exactly like its heart. It's just like this jumbled, anti-aesthetic, disproportional mess of a thing. And well, there's the religion. So I know I understand people that are beyond religion, but I don't know that any sort of civilization can come from a bunch of people that are post-religious, post-storytelling, post-worship.
I think Jonathan is one of the best prophets of this, because Jonathan doesn't so much give a prescription besides go to church as demonstrate that what we've seen in the past continues to, dare I use this word, emerge repeatedly, because the Bible is not just sort of in Protestant terms a playbook, but it is also a description. And I think that's part of the reason why Jonathan has been such a prophet in this space, because it's sort of distinct from Jordan and a number of the others who are more leaning programmatically. Jonathan has basically been pointing out patterns and fractals and descriptions, and I think that's part of his prophetic vocation. Hate to embarrass you, Jonathan, but that's what I
it's
think.
a little much there.
You don't like the word prophet? Does that mean something in Orthodoxy that doesn't mean, or just because the
He's
Calvinist?
not a priest.
Okay, yeah.
No, certainly not a priest. That's for sure.
Professor,
I
prophet.
think Joe Heath talks about this in Cooperation and Social Justice, about the scalability of various forms and how certain things simply don't scale. And he's using it in the conversation of someone talking about socialism as a camping trip where everyone just gets along. And he says that kind of cooperative enterprise doesn't scale. You can't have that kind of trusting relationship with 100 million people.
No.
And so he says one of the problems is of scalability. Yeah. And because churches can iterate down to that small local congregation all the way up to the Vatican, if you're Catholic, you can have something that scales. I'm Pentecostal. We have the bare minimum required infrastructure as necessary in Canadian law. But the way that we operate is authority through relationship. And that's the way I've always operated. So I've worked for everyone from Center for Renewing America. I've worked with Kellen Pluckrose at Counterweight, with James Lindsay, with Chris Rufo, many of the larger sort of counter-woke space people I've worked with on various projects, but never in a place where I had authority over them, power. It was always authority through relationship. And I guess that's kind of the model that I think of, because that model doesn't scale, but it iterates. And you can iterate that at the level of local communities. And once you get enough of those local communities, that can scale upward.
Yeah.
That's a scalable thing. And so in every conversation I have with every single person, my DMs are full all the time, man. But the only authority I exercise, if you could even call it that, which I don't know I would, is just the authority of the relationship I have with the person who trusts me on the basis that I've done the reading or I've done the work or I've done whatever else. And so I think that scalability thing is, how do you scale relationship in a stable way? And I think the iteration of those congregations across multiple geographic and cultural spaces, and then being able to have those congregational entities scale upwards in a way that allows for the creation of larger hierarchies and cooperative entities that exist on what we might think of a federal or national scale, I think is massively important. And I don't know how you get that without a belief structure behind it, aka a religion. I just don't see how atheism can get you that, because how do you have a confessional congregation of atheists? We all don't believe this.
Yeah.
We should be fair to atheists, because atheism is basically a rationalism. And the difficulty is it too easily slips into nihilism. And
or absolutism.
Yeah,
but what's their
absolutism.
iterative structure? Yeah. What's their iterative scalable structure for rationalism?
Well, that's basically the modern Enlightenment project, but it's been parasitic upon Christianity which from what it grew, and that's what's beginning to reveal now.
That it was
once
assuming,
it gets beyond these assumptions, it sort of comes undone.
Yeah.
I have to, guys. I have to check out. I already had this little family thing going on here,
okay.
But I have to go. But it's been great. It's nice to meet you, Wokal. It was we've been I've seen you on Twitter, and we've had a few little exchanges and everything. So it's good to meet you. And Benjamin, as usual, keep doing what you're doing.
It was wonderful to meet you, Jonathan. I quite appreciate your work, as I have watched you do the various things. My favorite meme is of you, because Jordan says, "So Christ," in the symbolic sense, and you go like this.
Hell more real, or is the resurrection more real? And obviously, in some sense, I'm speaking symbolically. But it seems to me...
Yeah. it's my
favorite meme.
Jordan and me, pretty much summed up in kindly, though, with a lot of love, because I love him to death, so it's like...
Yes. That's what's nice, is that you guys engage in this sort of fun thing. It's very, very, very deep, but it's still playful and fun.
Thanks, I appreciate it, Wokal. And you keep fighting. You know, I'm not as much like in the political realm, but I admire people that like I said, anybody who's that when I see someone that's good and is getting in and has got the arguments, I deeply appreciate it. So thanks. And Paul, as usual, it's always good to see you.
Always good to see you, Jonathan.
All right, I'm gonna check out.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
I think I'll end the recording there. If that's cool with you guys.
Yeah. Actually, Wokal and I, when we did our talk, I think we recorded 2 hours. I think we talked for 4.
Yeah. Local game.
I'm always game.